In the cold, grey corridors of the North Atlantic, the spring of 1941 did not arrive with the promise of life, but with the chilling breath of an apex predator. The ocean had become a vast, lightless stage for a drama that would determine the survival of an empire. Great Britain, isolated and battered, was a fortress fed by a thin, fragile umbilical cord of merchant ships. To sever that cord was to win the war without ever setting foot on English soil. This was the singular, terrifying mandate of Operation Rheinübung. At the heart of this German gambit stood a vessel that had already transitioned from a ship into a myth. The Bismarck was more than 50,000 tons of steel, engineering, and hubris. She was the physical manifestation of a regime's desire to dominate the waves, a floating fortress equipped with 8 15-inch guns that could hurl shells the weight of a motor car over the horizon with terrifying precision. Beside her steamed the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen, a sleek, predatory companion designed for scouting and slaughter. But myths are rarely as invincible as they appear. Behind the Bismarck's imposing silhouette lay a systemic flaw in German naval doctrine. The High Command was gripped by a paralyzing fear of losing their capital ships, leading to a tactical timidity that would often clash with the aggressive reality of naval combat. Admiral Gunther Lütjens, the man in command of the task force, was a stoic, traditional officer who carried the weight of this contradiction. He knew that the moment he left the Baltic, the entire weight of the Royal Navy would descend upon him. Across the water, the British response was fueled by a mixture of desperation and tradition. The Royal Navy was no longer the undisputed master of the seas, but it remained the psychological spine of the nation. To the British public, the pride of the fleet was not a modern battleship, but a 20-year-old veteran of the Great War era. HMS Hood, the mighty Hood, was the most famous warship in the world. She was long, elegant, and fast, a symbol of imperial reach. But beneath her graceful lines lay a lethal architectural compromise. The Hood was a battlecruiser, a class of ship designed on the philosophy that speed was the best protection. To achieve that speed, her designers had sacrificed horizontal deck armor. She was built to fight at ranges where shells hit her thick belt on the sides, not to endure the plunging fire of long-range modern engagement where shells fall from the sky like meteors. By 1941, she was an aging aristocrat forced to duel a young, ruthless professional. She was overweight, her hull stressed by decades of service, and her protection was fundamentally inadequate for the shells the Bismarck was prepared to fire. On the evening of May 23, the eyes of the British fleet found their mark. The heavy cruisers HMS Suffolk and HMS Norfolk, patrolling the ice-choked waters of the Denmark Strait, caught a flicker on their primitive radar screens. They were the unsung sentinels of the North Atlantic, maintaining contact through driving snow and fog, shadowing the German behemoth while staying just out of range of its devastating guns. Their report sparked a frantic mobilization. Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland, aboard the Hood, shifted his course to intercept. With him was the HMS Prince of Wales, a brand-new King George V-class battleship. She was so new that civilian contractors were still on board, working frantically to fix her temperamental main batteries even as she steamed toward combat. This was the first of many systemic failures that would haunt the British that night. Holland was leading a force that was powerful on paper but fractured in reality. One ship was too old, the other was too new. Together, they raced through the dark to meet a destiny that was already being written in the mathematics of ballistics and armor thickness. As the sun began to tease the horizon in the early hours of May 24, Holland made a fateful tactical decision. He chose to approach the German ships at a sharp angle. His logic was sound in theory. By closing the distance rapidly, he hoped to shorten the time his ships were exposed to plunging fire, forcing the engagement into a flat trajectory gunfight where the Hood side armor could hold. But this maneuver came with a devastating cost. By heading almost directly at the Bismarck, the British ships could only use their forward turrets. Their rear guns were masked by their own superstructures, effectively cutting their firepower in half. The German perspective was one of cold, calculated observation. On the bridge of the Bismarck, there was a moment of confusion that would later be recognized as a missed opportunity for the British. Because the Prinz Eugen was leading the formation, and because her silhouette was remarkably similar to the Bismarck's, Admiral Holland initially ordered his ships to target the lead vessel. It was a simple, human error in the heat of the moment, but in a duel of giants, a single minute of wasted fire is an eternity. When the Bismarck finally spoke, the sound was described by survivors as a physical blow. Her first salvos were not mere ranging shots, they were terrifyingly accurate. The German fire control systems, utilizing stereoscopic rangefinders and advanced analog computers, were arguably the best in the world. Within minutes, they had found the range. The Prince of Wales was hit, her bridge splattered with the blood of officers, her sophisticated guns jamming after every few rounds. But the Bismarck's primary focus remained on the larger target, the ship that represented the heart of the British Empire. The Hood was firing back, her great guns roaring in the morning mist, but she was struggling to find her mark. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and the spray of freezing salt water. Admiral Holland finally ordered a turn to the port, a maneuver intended to bring his rear guns to bear and open up the full broadside of his force. It was the moment the British had been waiting for, the moment they could finally unleash their full potential. But it was also the moment the structural flaws of the Hood met the ruthless efficiency of German engineering. At approximately 6 o'clock, the Bismarck's fifth salvo straddled the Hood. Observers on the Prince of Wales saw a terrifying sight, a thin, white pillar of fire erupting near the Hood's mainmast. It was followed almost instantly by an explosion that defied description. A massive tongue of flame, hundreds of feet high, tore through the center of the ship. The mighty Hood, the icon of an empire, did not just sink. She disintegrated. The fire had found the after magazines, passing through the thin deck armor that had been her secret shame for 20 years. The ship broke in two. The bow rose high into the air, while the stern was enveloped in a ball of fire that turned the grey sea into a cauldron of orange and black. In less than 3 minutes, she was gone. Out of a crew of 1,418 men, only 3 survived. They were left bobbing in the freezing oil and debris, witnessing the vanishing of a world. The loss was so sudden, so absolute, that the crew of the Prince of Wales, watching from a few miles away, were momentarily paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of what they had seen. The Prince of Wales was now alone, facing 2 German ships that were flushing with the adrenaline of a kill. She was hit repeatedly. A 15-inch shell passed through her bridge without exploding, but the vacuum and the debris it created killed nearly everyone in the compartment. Captain Leach, one of the few survivors on the bridge, realized that to stay was to commit suicide. His guns were failing, his ship was taking on water, and the Bismarck was closing in for the finish. He ordered a smoke screen and turned away, a retreat born of cold necessity. Admiral Lutjens now faced his own crossroads. The Bismarck had won a stunning victory, but she had not escaped unscathed. A single shell from the Prince of Wales had struck her bow, piercing a fuel tank and contaminating her oil supply with seawater. She was trailing a massive slick, and her bow was dipping into the waves. Lutjens had a choice: continue the raid into the Atlantic or limp toward occupied France for repairs. He chose the latter, a decision that would eventually lead to his ship's own doom. But for now, the German Titan was still afloat and still dangerous. The sinking of the Hood sent a shockwave through the British Admiralty that bordered on trauma. It was not just the loss of a ship, it was the shattering of a national identity. The order went out from Winston Churchill himself: sink the Bismarck. Every available vessel in the Atlantic, from battleships to destroyers to flimsy biplane torpedo bombers, was diverted. The hunt was no longer a tactical operation, it was a quest for vengeance, a desperate attempt to restore the balance of power and the pride of a nation. In the aftermath, the technical postmortems would point to the systemic failure of British naval construction. The Battlecruiser concept, championed by Jackie Fisher decades earlier, was revealed to be a lethal gamble. You cannot outrun a shell that travels at twice the speed of sound. The Hood had been a victim of a design philosophy that prioritized the offensive over the defensive, a philosophy that crumbled the moment it faced a modern adversary. It was a failure of imagination, a belief that prestige could compensate for physics. The unsung heroes of the Denmark Strait were the men who stayed at their posts as the world ended. The gunners in the Hood's forward turrets who fired one last salvo even as the ship was breaking in two beneath them. The technicians on the Prince of Wales who crawled into the cramped, grease-filled machinery of the turrets to manually clear jams while the ship was being hammered by heavy shells. These men were the human bridge between a failing system and the survival of their fleet. As the smoke cleared over the Denmark Strait, the era of the majestic battleship began its slow, agonizing sunset. The engagement had proven that even the mightiest vessels were fragile shells, susceptible to a single, catastrophic stroke of luck or engineering. The Bismarck had won the battle, but in doing so, she had signed her own death warrant. The rage she ignited in the Royal Navy would ensure that she would never reach the safety of the French coast. The ocean, vast and indifferent, prepared to swallow another Titan. The tragedy of the Denmark Strait serves as a philosophical waypoint in the history of warfare. It reminds us that tradition is a poor shield against the relentless march of technology. The Hood was a relic of a Victorian mindset, a grand statement of intent that was hollow at its core. The Bismarck was the manifestation of a new, darker age of industrial slaughter. When they met, the resulting explosion was the sound of the 20th century violently discarding its past. History is written in the blood of those who inhabit the gap between what a weapon is and what we wish it to be. The men of the Hood did not die for a tactical error or a design flaw, they died as the last guard of an aging world that could no longer protect its own. As the cold Atlantic waters closed over the wreckage, they took with them the last illusions of the age of sail and steam, leaving behind only the cold, hard reality of the missile and the carrier. The ghosts of the Denmark Strait still whisper in the currents of the North Atlantic. They speak of the fragility of power and the terrifying speed with which the pride of a nation can be reduced to scrap and silence. The sea does not remember the names of the ships or the brilliance of the admirals, it only remembers the weight of the steel and the silence that follows the fire. In the end, even the most legendary of giants are but fleeting shadows on the surface of an eternal, uncaring deep.